Look at the trees, and what do you see? The beauty of God. Look at the flowers, and what do you see? The beauty of God. Look at the sky, and what do you see? The beauty of God. Now, look in the mirror, and what do you see? The beauty of God. Randy, will you please light the chalice? At times, our light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lit the flame before us and helped us with our community. Before we sing our first hymn, let me remind you to leave yourselves muted. However, we want you and who is ever with you to sing with Mary as big and as loud as you like. Let's make it a joyous occasion. So let's sing the opening hymn, Where My Free Spirit Leads, number 324.
Where my free spirit onward leads, well, there shall be my way. My own light illumined, I've journeyed night and day. My age a time-worn cloak I wear, as once I wore my youth. I celebrate life's mystery, I celebrate death's truth. My family is not confined to mother, maid, and child, but it includes all creatures, be they tame or be they wild. My family upon this earth includes all living things. I celebrate life's mystery. I celebrate on wings, my bad. The ever-spinning universe, well, there shall be my home. I sing and spin within it, as through all life I roam. Eternity is hard to ken, and harder still is this. A human life is truly seen, is briefer than a kiss.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of Cambria, and we are glad that you have joined us today. We acknowledge that our UUCC sanctuary stands on land that was originally occupied by the Chumash indigenous people whose ancestors lived primarily in the San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. As a Unitarian community, we celebrate religious diversity and welcome all who journeyed in search of faith and spirituality. The UUCC is a lay-led congregation inviting speakers from different religious traditions, scientific, and/or spiritual backgrounds to speak on our pulpit. We encourage presentations covering a variety of topics and areas of interest to our community that connect us with the UU7 principles. Now, today's service centers around the seventh principle. We affirm and promote respect for the independent web of all existence, of which we are a part. Our seventh principle may be our Unitarian Universalist way of coming to embrace something greater than ourselves. The interdependent web expressed as a spirit of life, the ground of all being, the oneness of existence, the community forming power, the process of life, the creative force, and even God can help us develop the social understanding of ourselves that we and our culture so desperately need. It is a source of meaning which we can dedicate our lives. My name is Art Gillingham, and I have the pleasure of being your worship associate this morning. And I would like to extend a special greeting to any guests and today's visitors. We are glad you have joined us this morning under these challenging circumstances. Now, if you are not on our mailing list, please visit our website at uuccambria.org so that we may keep you informed about all of our activities. And please check out What's Happening as a weekly e-blast sent to all of our members and friends. This is a great way to stay in touch with all the latest news in our community. And a reminder, if you wish to see this or any other of our past Zoom services, they are stored on our website and can be found on Facebook as well. Finally, the membership committee invites non-members to consider becoming members of our community. Please contact Janet Cooper or a person on the board if you are interested. So thank you. And once again, welcome to everyone. Let us now do our affirmation. The affirmation is both a recognition of the nature of our community, as well as a promise we make and aspire to. Let us now recite our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. In loving memory of Jim Shepard, we are saddened to announce his passing. This past Tuesday, Jim's life, a life which was so beautifully lived, deserves to be beautifully remembered. We mourn the passing of our fellow friend, Jim Shepard, and we send our condolences to Suzanne Lewis and all of Jim's family and friends. We set aside this time for any short announcements that would be of interest to our UU community members and friends. Please keep in mind that your items should be short and to the point. For any items that need more explanation, please call or email the person after the service to be respectful of everyone's time. So if you have an announcement, please raise your Zoom hand by clicking on the raise hand button in the reactions box. And when Diane calls your name, please unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you, Art. I believe we have one announcement from the sanctuary from Andy.
It's true, Diane. Thank you. I'd like to announce the next gathering of the On Being discussion group that has been happening on occasion this Friday at July 16th at 4 p.m. We'll discuss the conversation entitled, "We Go Forward with a Sanity and a Love." Krista Tippett interviews beloved writer Nikki Giovanni, who in the 1960s was a poet of the Black arts movement that nourished civil rights. She's a professor at Virginia Tech, where she brought beauty and courage after the 2007 shooting there. She's an enthusiastic elder, born in 1943, and Nikki Giovanni has become an adored voice to a new generation. We'll listen to a recording of the interview and then share our thoughts on what we've heard. We can gather here at the sanctuary or virtually on Zoom. Details will be in this week's What's Happening newsletter. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, we have a hand up from Robert and Nancy.
Hi, this is Nancy. Just reminding people that the Moving Towards Racial Justice group is meeting this Wednesday at 7 on Zoom. I need to send out a link. We'll be discussing the book, My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menachem. And it's a different sort of a book. It's than we usually have read. Anyways, anybody's welcome to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. All right, let's see. Doesn't look like there are any more hands. I have one announcement. At our next service, we will be sharing our lives with one another as a way to reconnect through the stories of our recent experiences. Since some people like to know ahead of time what the questions will be, they will be posted in our newsletter so you will have time to think about what you'd like to say. We would like to hear from each one of you about the journey that has been your life for the past 1.5 to 2 years. I look forward to seeing you next week. And you don't have to check the questions out. You can just come and be spontaneous and share parts of your life. So we're going to have a circle sharing, which we haven't done in quite some time. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. Okay, I think that's all. And Art, back to you.
Well, thank you, Diane. And by the way, next week, Diane DeMarco, as you just mentioned, will be hosting Sharing Ourselves in the UU Community. Sharing together some of our personal and significant joys and concerns brings us closer as a faith community. We invite you to share these milestones that are deeply felt as part of your personal life. But please be mindful and considerate of all those who come to worship with us this morning. This is a time of community building. So if you have a joy or concern, please raise your Zoom hand when Diane calls your name. Please unmute yourself and begin to speak. And once again, I'd like to make a special comment in behalf of Jim Shepard's passing. Diane, do you have anyone who would like to raise their hand?
Yes, go right ahead, Art. Did you want to make another comment?
No, that's all the one I had. Thank you.
Okay, and is there anyone else in the sanctuary today? All right, so Amanda Rice, would you please unmute yourself and tell us your joy or concern?
First is my joy for our acknowledging the indigenous peoples that used to occupy this land. I think we need to also maybe include a statement that they are still here, very much so, and it's not just in the past. So that's one. The second joy I have is I have a new foster cat since Thursday, and Lindy is just starting to come out of her shell. So let's hope she gets a good home. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Treva, would you please unmute yourself and share with us your joy and concern or concern?
Yeah, I would like to light a candle of joy for my absolutely amazing little sister who is, she has a bigger heart than I think anyone is ever going to know. Anyway, I birdwalk. She, along those notes of being amazing, she just passed her final board exam. So she got that done. And then on the 18th, we're going to be celebrating her birthday with her, and she's going to be 33, which just isn't right. We need to figure that out. She's still like 13 or 14. So, all right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Treva. Janet, would you please unmute yourself and share with us your joy or concern?
Yeah, thanks, Diane. First, a correction, she's actually turning 34. I know it's a shock. And secondly, I'd like to light a candle of concern, of sorrow for the passing of Jim Shepard. I had the opportunity to get to know him a little last year when I was working with the Caring Committee. He was a wonderful, warm person, very deeply concerned about Suzanne. And so just I hope everybody's thoughts and prayers go out to their family as they work through this. So thank you.
Thank you, Janet. All right, I don't think there are any more hands, so we'll take it back to you, Art.
The collective flames of these candles embodied all the joys and sorrows which may have gone unspoken today, but are deeply felt by our community. The first reading is an extract from Ecomysticism, The Profound Experience of Nature as a Spiritual Guide by Carl von Essen. According to von Essen, the mystical experience you are about to hear has a lot in common with the Zen practice of shikantaza. The mind is brought to a new, crystallized, heightened state of awareness of the connectivity of ourself with nature and the universe. Here is the extract. I came upon fresh tracks of several elk, including one bull. The morning was bright and sunny with the slight wind in my face, assuring me of getting reasonably close to my quarry. After perhaps an hour of slow and graceful tracking, I came out upon a long glade 50 yards wide. If the elk were nearby, they would detect my crossing the snowy and slushy meadow. So it remained for me to be completely still and pay complete attention to the opposite hillside. I now felt their presence, and somehow I knew they felt mine. As I stood there, the sense of time remarkably changed. What seemed like minutes I found later to be over an hour. At the same moment, an intense feeling of the clarity of the scene swept over me. All of my senses seemed to sharpen to an exquisite razor's edge. I heard the tiniest sounds of distant streams and rustling leaves, as if magnified in a celestial amplifier. Everything seemed closer to me, and I felt amazingly a sort of merger of myself with everything, a sense of belonging. I was connected with everything in that panorama: the grass, the trees, the rocks, the insects, birds, the elk that I knew were quietly moving uphill out of my sight. I felt a great rush of emotion. I felt the joy of being alive, the chance to exist along with everything else. I will never forget that day. Let us enter into a place of peace and serenity where you are one with your spiritual being. Be at peace in your space, where the absence of all that is temporal is the most cherished gift. Let us enter the stillness. Please come back now. The second reading is a poem by Robinson Jeffers entitled Vulture.
Art, before you start, could you speak up a bit? We're having some people having a hard time hearing you.
The second reading is a poem by Robinson Jeffers entitled Vulture. I had walked since dawn and lay down to rest on bare hillside above the ocean. I saw through half-shut eyelids a vulture wheeling high above me in heaven, and presently it passed again, but lower and nearer. Its orbit narrowing, I understood then that I was under inspection. I lay death still and heard the flight feathers whistle above me and make the circle and come even nearer. I could see the red head between the great wings staring downward. I said, "My dear bird, you are wasting your time here. These old bones still work. They are not for you." But oh, how beautifully he looked down, gliding down on those great sails. How beautiful he looked, veering away in the sea light over the precipice. I tell you solemnly that I was sorry to have disappointed him. To be eaten by that beak and become part of him, to share those wings and those eyes, what a sublime end of one's body. What an enskyment. What a life after death. The anthem today is Wind Song by John Denver and will be sung by Mary Schwalbe.
The wind is the whisper of our mother, the earth. The wind is the hand of our father, the sky. The wind watches over our struggles and pleasures. The wind is the goddess who first learned to fly. The wind is the bearer of bad and good tidings, the weaver of darkness, the bringer of dawn. The wind gives the rain and then builds us a rainbow. The wind is the singer who sang the first song. The wind is a twister of anger and warning. The wind brings the fragrance of fresh limon hay. The wind is a racer and a white stallion running, and the sweet taste of love on a slow summer's day. The wind knows the songs of the cities and canyons, the thunder of mountains, the roar of the sea. The wind is the taker and giver of mornings. The wind is the symbol of all that is free. So welcome the wind
Today's sermon is entitled Inhumanism of the Seventh Principle, to be delivered by Randy Schwalbe. Because Randy is the chair of the worship committee, this is an excellent opportunity to sing its praises. If you've ever stopped to wonder how 52 speakers grace our pulpit each week, each year, it is through the dedicated and spirited work of this committee, who not only creates and maintains the decorum of the UUCC services each Sunday, but also evaluates and recommends services in the future. These services are not arranged by some outside agency or delivered to us from the First Church of Christian Science in Boston. The UUC service is a cherished gift produced by our worship committee and our music director to help further each of us in our own spiritual journey and to be enjoyed by our church community, family, and friends. Oh, and Randy is really enjoying his retirement now that he's serving as the resident conductor of the Atascadero Concert Band, writing and directing the Pine Dorado Follies, which we're sorry, or the next show will be in 2022. And he is an apprentice carpenter building a greenhouse for his sweet beloved. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to bring you Randy Schwalbe.
Thank you, Art, and good morning. Last Sunday morning, when the worship associate, Andy Fagan, announced next week's sermon, he made a somewhat indiscernible remark, something caused by a sudden bout with cognitive dissonance. In other words, the title he recited out loud made no sense. After all, the seventh principle is wondrous and joyous in its intent, while a term like inhumanism comes across as dark, negative, and frankly, anti-UU. How can this be? Well, Andy answered that by saying, I guess we'll have to wait until next week to find out. Andy, thank you for a terrific and albeit impromptu lead-in. And with that, I'm finished. Go in peace. Oh, okay. Just kidding. First, I want to mention the title of my talk is a bit misleading. I did it to garner your attention. This talk is more about inhumanism with a reference to the seventh principle later on. And a shocker alert, I do not have slides to share. So if you wish, you can minimize this slide by clicking on the slide bar between the slide image and me. And then while holding down the mouse, simply slide the vertical bar to the left to make me bigger and Robinson smaller. I will be using those 25-cent words up there, so keep an eye on them. Okay. Before I get into this inhumanism business, I wish to note that a talk covering Robinson Jeffers was scheduled, but was rescinded by its author. I was highly interested in the subject in that it had close connections with a talk I gave several years ago, in which I ostensibly referenced a philosophical study called solipsism. So I decided to pursue the philosophy behind inhumanism to a minor extent and deliver my take on it. Oh, and one more thing before I delve into inhumanism. I just mentioned another ism word, so I'm obliged to explain. Solipsism is a philosophical idea that only one's mind is sure to exist. It's an epistemological pursuit, the study of nature, origin, and the scope of knowledge. As I was saying, solipsism holds that knowledge of anything outside of one's own mind is unsure. The external world and other minds cannot be known and might not exist outside the mind. Process that for a moment. Solipsism holds that knowledge of anything outside of one's own mind is unsure. The external world and other minds cannot be known and might not exist outside your mind. Existential denial, if I ever heard it. In my previous talk, I had shared a particular view of mine that coincides neatly with solipsism. I stated that the center of the universe is inside my head. All that really exists in the universe is what I can perceive through my five senses. Everything and everyone else are merely artificial reproductions of alleged realities. For example, every New Year's Day, you can watch the Rose Parade in Roseville on TV. But is it real or just some images manufactured for TV viewing? In 1976, I marched in the parade with the UCLA band and marched on the field for the pregame and halftime shows. Now, when I see those images of the Rose Parade and bowl game on TV, I know it's real. The same with celebrities. They are like made up comic book figures until I see them in person. And spoiler alert, all of you that I have met personally are real in my universe. But if, God forbid, I meet my demise, you are all going down with me. There will be no more universe. The entire universe gone. Poof. Just like that. Okay, with that said, now we look at the polar opposite of solipsism, inhumanism. Its inherent ugliness as a word stems from its inadvertent derivative. Inhuman is to behave in a manner not consistent with promoting and nurturing the human race. Inhuman is lacking human qualities of compassion and mercy. To put it bluntly, inhuman is bad. And another derivative of is inhumane. It is simply the act of cruelty, being mean and mean-spirited, acting without compassion for misery or suffering. So yes, Andy did have a brief cause for concern, but let not your heart be troubled. A renowned poet who lived just up the coast during the early and mid-20th century in Carmel named Robinson Jeffers coined the word inhumanism, to which he alluded often in his body of work. He did not actually use that word in his poetry, but he did write about it when commenting on his pieces or introducing them in his collective books. It is rather unfortunate that this word is so closely related to those other bad words. And does adding ism to either of these bad words make it any better? Ask anyone who has written a doctoral thesis. Adding ism to a noun or adjective instantly makes it an academic study. I call it thesisism. Go look it up. But adding ism to a word does not change the meaning of the word itself. In this case, however, adding ism to inhuman changed the meaning dramatically. But to be technically correct, Jeffers did not add ism to inhuman. Rather, he added in to the word humanism. Mercedes Mongian explained this in her essay, Robinson Jeffers, A Study in Humanism. Too many N's. All right, this is a quote. Since one phase of humanism is a system of thinking in which man, his interest, and development are made dominant, I would contend that inhumanism would, by its negative prefix, deny man's interest or development, subduing them in the interest of something greater. Or as Jeffers aptly explains it, inhumanism is a shifting of emphasis and significance from man to not man. All of Jeffers' poetry demonstrates this denial of man's importance and potential, contrasting it against a magnificent beauty and immense worth of the natural world. The poet's lavish regard for nature and his undercutting of man together work to produce the basic principles on which his philosophy is founded. End of quote. A professor of philosophy could spend a better part of a semester unpacking this statement in a lecture hall, but I am not a philosopher and I only have about 15 minutes left. So right away, you could surmise that Jeffers' view of humanity flies in the face of most Christian Judeo religions, rendering him as not a universally beloved poet of the ages. This, along with some of his political leanings, such as opposing the US involvement in what became World War II, or offering public criticism of President Franklin Roosevelt, created a highly polarized fan base made up of ardent supporters and detractors alike. So let's ponder this for a moment. What is the notion of inhumanism as not man? Well, let me put it in a perspective I derived in terms of today's global dialogue. Let's say a person is able to act in a manner of superiority over others based on the perceived, if not granted, notion of privilege by virtue of social status, political power, or race. And let's say this privilege is not earned, just assumed. By merely observing the acts of superiority displayed by this person, one can conclude that these acts are characterized by a lack of empathy and compassion. Why should I bother putting myself in your shoes? I like where I am. Or, why should I care about your plight? I got it good, and too bad you don't. In Jeffers' arena, this translates directly to man's dialogue with nature. Sure, we have a delightful relationship with nature. She provides us with terrific travel destinations, ample food and drink, supplies, and energy. But Jeffers' gripe was not about our disrespect towards nature or the ingratitude we often display by being wasteful or abusive to the environment. No, his position, quite bluntly, is to regard nature as the main attraction, the headliner, the grand poobah of this planet, not humans. And for billions of years before humans arrived, everything was just perfect until some meteor slipped past Jupiter's vanguard and smacked Mother Earth right in the kisser, taking out thousands of species forever, including our beloved dinosaurs. But the Earth kept on spinning and revolving while nature was busy healing and reinventing herself. Somehow, during the evolutionary process, the bouncer at the door missed Homo sapiens sneaking into nature's nightclub. Then these humans colonized as though they just came in from a distant hostile planet with a mission to take over this planet. And essentially, that's precisely what we humans have done. Again, Jeffers' philosophy is not focusing on climate change and the like. His poetry reflected and celebrated the eco-mystical nature of nature itself. Man is merely an intruder. Man is not one of the pieces of nature's jigsaw puzzle. And so, going back to the antithesis of humanism, man's importance and potential gets a big no thank you in Jeffers' world. Now that Jeffers has opened this philosophical door for us to ponder, is he right? Are his claims valid? Well, it all boils down to perspective. And there are infinite perspectives. Since I mentioned eco-mystical, we'll start with the mystical or mysticism. Through mysticism, humans are connected to God and this place called inner space. With this being the core of Christian Judeo religions, we find a remarkable void of all that is ecological in this definition. In other words, that feeling of mysticism comes from beyond, from somewhere outside the sphere of reality. Curiously, humans try desperately to define, structure, account for, and codify this feeling in terms of what is real. For example, one of the means to comprehend this mysticism is making the claim that we are created in God's image, thereby assigning a physical form of which is very familiar to some entity, God, that is not in the sphere of reality. And humans have given this God person authority to make laws that come from beyond. While committing an act of apparent tampering with the cosmos, God created this little blue-green planet, put lots of creatures on it, and charged the human species to have dominion over all these living creatures. It's all there in Genesis chapter 1. God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, and all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground." End of quote. Just shy of 2/3 of the world's population subscribe to this by virtue of the Old Testament as its source. And I might add the obvious: the ability for a claim such as this can be easily attributed to our ability as humans to reason, rationalize, and comprehend our own mortality. Just to be fair, with regards to natural and instinctive abilities, we rank far lower than most species. We can't fly, our hearing and sense of smell are so-so, we are not able to crawl on walls and ceilings, and we are defenseless for the first 4 or 5 years of our lives, and the list goes on. So yes, our specialty is the ability to reason and communicate at levels far beyond other species. After all, what species out there is producing nature shows about humans? An interesting side note here: as a youngster, I learned that every species has a natural predator except possibly the lion, hence dubbed the king of the jungle. I later learned that the real king of the animal jungle is the porcupine. While its quills are not toxic, if not removed, the victim will become infected and die. Then I learned that every species has one common predator: the human. Yes, even the mighty porcupine is no match for the human. With our opposing finger and thumb, we could just simply pull the quill out and dress the wound. So who or what can legitimately challenge the human assertion of global dominion? But it is precisely this smugness, this arrogance of our perceived superiority above all other species that enables man to make the claim of global dominion. And thus fulfills one other human attribute: its collective ego. Jeffers patently defies this. In natural law, humans have no real dominion. And the numinous, the presence of the divinity, is experienced in the physical aspects of nature. William Everson, an American poet of the San Francisco Renaissance, wrote extensively about Jeffers. He said, quote, "Secularism and institutionalized religion have given humans a sense of superiority to material nature. Hence, Jeffers can only evoke the numinous by degrading humans to a place below that to which they have come to feel themselves superior, a move from deceptive superiority to a realistic inferiority via a reduction of humanity and its concerns." End of quote. Throughout his tome, Jeffers' poetry suggests, or rather insists, that the importance of humans, i.e. humanism, is in reality unimportant and inconsequential. Think about it. We watch the news every night, read opinions about pressing issues of the day, go to war over subtle variances of religious or political leanings for the sake of power, and so on. But if something out there was able to wave a wand and eliminate just one species, and it happened to be the Homo sapien, what would happen? Hey, don't kid yourself. The microscopic coronavirus made a valiant attempt this past year. Anyway, nature would reclaim the planet. It would take several thousand years, but the scars left behind by humans, buildings and the like, would erode, leaving scant reminders of our existence. And I'm afraid the only species that would truly miss us would be the canine. Poor lovable Master Shifu would be lost without Mary and me and Triva. Another side note, what I fondly remember as a botany, from a botany course I took in college, was the 180-degree rule. Ask me about that after the service. Eating a blood orange for the first time, and the definition of a weed that goes something like this. A weed is any unwanted plant that thrives near and around human disturbances, such as roads, urban centers, etc. Now think about this for a moment. Doesn't the human being itself fit this definition? Yeah. So going back to divinity, if we mix ecology into this mysticism brew, we get ecomysticism. And here's where it gets fun. A bevy of writers, critics, and philosophers have tried to pigeonhole Robinson Jeffers Is he a religious poet or philosopher? But instead of psychoanalyzing his work, I will instead mention his perception of God. Briefly, Jeffers has extended the concept of pantheism. The term pantheism is derived from the Greek roots in which pan means all and theos means God. Mysticism and the supernatural are not within this sphere. In his book, The God Delusion, Richard Dawson states pantheism is sexed up atheism. God is not some old dude pointing a finger at Adam, but the physical whole of the entire cosmos. According to Tagnani in his thesis, the subtle adjustment Jeffers makes within his Inhumanism philosophy is that God is not some force that controls everything or is within everything, but is everything. If you wore a t-shirt that says, "I am God," you would be correct. Placing a play card in front of a rock at a gem show with the word God on it is also correct. Borrowing from the Navajo Nation is the concept that each individual does not contain a finite set of knowledge and awareness in one's head, but instead, a universal awareness is passed on and shared by all living creatures, transmitted by the wind itself. Again, metaphysical divinity, not mystical divinity. Jeffers goes further, indicating all living and non-living things share a consciousness. The soul is more in tune with the material world rather than something deep inside oneself that moves on after the physical expires. I contend, yes, me personally, I claim that Inhumanism means that when a person dies, there is no shift in the amount of consciousness in the cosmos. Remember earlier how I threatened your very existence if I were to perish? Well, there you have a stunning example of how solipsism and Inhumanism are polar opposites. If I go, the entire universe goes with me, or when my time is up, I merely experience a change in my physical composition to something in the natural world. Jeffers put the thought of the afterlife so eloquently when encountering a vulture in flight while he himself was still being alive. Quote, "I was sorry to have disappointed him, to be eaten by that beak and become part of him, to share those wings and those eyes. What a sublime end to one's body. What an escapement. What a life after death." In other words, our afterlife is akin to a leaf falling off a tree. We just simply compost our way back into nature. But don't get me wrong, Jeffers did not have an issue with humans per se, just with the human attitude of superiority and indifference to the rest of nature. Instead of being buried in an elaborate coffin protecting the corpse from the elements, or cremation that causes pollution, the latest trend fits the Inhumanism ideal. Simply bury the unadorned body in a hole in the ground and let nature do the rest. And around the time Jeffers was finishing college and marrying his wife, Edgar Rice Burroughs released a fictional iconic hero, Tarzan, in 1912. I did not find any connection between Tarzan and Jeffers, other than Tarzan was born a year after Jeffers. But unlike Jeffers, Tarzan has never met his demise. I bring to light this Tarzan because he represents the closest human manifestation of Inhumanism, something Burroughs understood and promoted as a fundamental character profile of this iconic folk hero, but was unaware of Jeffers' philosophical study. And we all know who this Tarzan is. Raised as a feral child in a family of great apes, and he had exceptional powers that made him a human embodiment of the natural jungle world. I'm going to take a leap and suggest that if Jeffers wrote a poem about the demise of Tarzan, he would illustrate a scene in which all of his animal buddies would be consuming his lifeless body as a sign of deep respect. But you must get past that feeling of indignation and to truly grasp the elegant beauty of this gesture. And one final note about Jeffers' philosophy. Have you noticed how we humans are constantly assigning or subscribing meaning to everything? The meaning of this and the meaning of that, ultimately leading to what is the meaning of life. So I will use one of Jeffers' poems to delve into what meaning really means. This is a Divinely Superfluous Beauty by Robinson Jeffers. The storm dances of gulls, the barking game of seals, over and under the ocean, divinely superfluous beauty. Rules the games, presides over destinies, makes trees grow and hills tower, waves fall. The incredible beauty of joy, stars with a fire, the joining of lips. Oh, let our loves too be joined. There is not a maiden burn and thirst for love more than my blood for you. By the shore of seals, while the wings weave like web in the air, divinely superfluous beauty. I found a worthy unsourced analysis that I would like to share with you. Inhumanism is the key to another of Jeffers' major themes, the beauty of the natural world. The poet is in awe of what he calls, in the title of another poem, divinely superfluous beauty. This is beauty that exists for its own sake, usually unseen by humans, from the starry wheels of the galaxies to the phosphorescent glow of the fish in the sea. Jeffers even finds beauty in the violence and apparent cruelty of nature. In other poems, he praises the violence of weather and the sea and the ferocity of hawks. He praises the seemingly cruel work of catching fish. The fishermen in this poem are not part of the city and civilization. Rather, they are making their living close to nature and are not condemned for killing the fish any more than the sea lions would be. They are a part of the pattern of life and death and thus contribute to the beauty to be found in the natural world. From this detached inhumanist viewpoint, the poet sees the tragedies of civilization and its estrangement from nature, as well as its eventual decline into chaos and darkness, as acceptable or even beautiful. These things all play their small parts in the inevitable evolution of the grand ways of the universe. End of quote. Enter the seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. This very principle concisely separates you from the Christian, Islamic, Judeo religions. This principle is very much in alignment with one of the basic tenets of the Hinduism in that all life is precious and should be treated as such. I'm aware that this principle can be viewed on several levels. The interdependent web, expressed as the community forming power, can help us develop that social understanding of ourselves that we and our culture so desperately need. This is viewing the seventh principle through a social justice lens and very much a current focus of the UU Nation. However, with regards to Inhumanism, the seventh principle supports this philosophy with its inclusiveness of all living things. This principle says we should respect all living things, whereas Inhumanism says we humans should find our rightful place among not just living things, but all things. So the Inhumanism of the seventh principle spotlights the coexistence of all living things. However, the seventh principle stops short of placing humans at the same level of importance as any other existence, living or inert. So what is the big takeaway from all this? First, I would surmise that solipsism and Inhumanism are two extremes on that grand philosophical scale. On one side, you may be tempted to regard yourself as invincible, holding the center of the universe in your head, thereby tempting the unaccountability of your actions. On the other side of that scale, it is rather difficult to deny the intellectual power of humans, but can that power be simply discounted in order for us to take our humble place in the metaphysical world? Maybe we can use the tenets of Jeffers' philosophy to temper our contentious relationship with nature and treat her with the reverence she deserves. It still remains the question of the ages. Does Jeffers offer a legitimate view of life, universe, and everything that our collective ego shields us from accepting? Or does the superiority of the human race hold sway, relegating Inhumanism into the academic dustbin of the quirky philosophies? You decide. Next time you veer off the trail and inadvertently step on some lovely flower, can you hear them cry, ouch?
Well, Randy, thank you very much for that very esoteric sermon. I also want to thank you for introducing us to what my father would call $5 words. Speaking of that, normally at this time we receive offerings from our congregants. However, due to the virtual format of this service, we invite you to make your offerings in one of the methods shown below on the screen. These methods are posted in the newsletter and on the UUCC website. Please keep in mind that our congregation is entirely self-funded by the democratic process. One of the privileges of our free church tradition is to provide all of the financial support for our many ministries from among ourselves. Generosity, therefore, is one of the spiritual values that we recognize as central to our personal and our institutional well-being. You are invited to participate in the blessing by giving and sending as an offering. Thank you. Our thanks for the gifts given and received for the work of this community. Let us now sing the doxology.
With breathless wings that breathless trees and gasp of currents on the wings, our hearts soar high above the breeze of songs the spirit longs to sing.
And please join us in singing our final hymn, The Blue Boat Home, number 1064.
Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my darling heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all the kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of
let us now recite the valediction. The flames of this chalice will no longer burn today, but the light of the flame within our hearts continues to shine brightly, illuminating the love felt in our community. Please extinguish your chalice at home. Thank you, Mary. After the benediction, please click on the gallery view button in the upper right corner of your screen, but please remain muted. Diane will call on you to raise your Zoom hand, and Randy will deliver the benediction.
This is the first stanza of the poem, The Augurs of the Innocents. To see the world in a grain of sand, in heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. Go now in peace.